Hey, family. Welcome to the tribe. I am your host, Octavius Davis, and you have tuned in to another edition of A Tribe Called Family podcast. Now, something that I've found very interesting in my adult life, I've had an opportunity to converse with many individuals who have found their family origin to be a bit of a mystery, whether it be believing the individuals that raised them were their biological parents, or finding out down the road that the person they were told is their parent is not indeed the case. Well, we have a guest today who has a story that I believe many of you can relate to. I know just in my personal conversations, I can definitely relate to it. And so I truly hope that what she shares will be helpful for you today. She's an educator, she's an author, she's a philanthropist, but she is also an individual who was also adopted.
Hey family, welcome to the tribe called family.
Please welcome to today's show, Dr. Katherin Garland. Dr. Garland, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I am well. Thank you for having me, Octavius. I appreciate it.
So, Dr. Garland, before we get into the nitty gritty of this thing called family, let's share with our listeners a little bit about who you are.
Okay, so I am an adoptee. It's something that I have recently started saying when I heard the term a couple years ago. Even though I knew I was adopted for a while, I never identified with the term adoptee. But I am an adoptee. I'm a same race adoptee. I was adopted when I was about 10 months old. My backstory is one of those of abandonment. And so my birth mother actually left me in an apartment building when I was 5 months old. And I was found by police and taken into then foster care. At that time, that was when they still had group homes. So I was at a group home. Um, and then eventually adopted out into the family that I knew. So even though I was adopted as a baby, um, I'm of a specific generation where they like to, I don't know, just kind of sweep things under the rug and act like everything's okay. So I didn't find out that I was adopted until I was about 10 years old. And that was due to like a circumstance. I just happened to have found out. And I don't have it here with me, but maybe I can take a picture and show it to you. You can put it in the show notes. But there was a book called Why Was I Adopted? And I've always been like a voracious reader. So I pick up this book and I'm reading it, and it's talking about how great adoption is and all the famous people who were adopted. It's written in the 70s. And it talks about how, you're super special and all of these things. And I get to the end of it and I'm like, so you mean to tell me there are people who are giving their baby away to somebody else to raise?
Not knowing that
Right.
you were adopted. Wow.
So I'm like boohoo crying because I've always been super sensitive. Now I just know that was anxiety. But I'm boohoo crying. My adoptive mother is kind of like standing there. I don't know. She's like watching me. And she's like, "What are you crying for?" And I was like, this is a terrible story. Somebody gave up their baby and then sent them to live with strangers. And she's like, "Well, you shouldn't cry because you're adopted." And I was like, what is happening right
So
now?
that's how you found out. Wow.
That's how I found out. Yes. I mean, I can laugh now, but I came from, again, 70s, 80s. There was a lot of suppression, repression. It's okay. We're not going to deal with it. And so she told me I shouldn't be sad about it. And so I kind of went to my room, cried about it, and we never talked about it ever again.
Wow. So you were 10 years old.
Yeah.
I can only begin to imagine the thoughts that may have been running in your mind, considering there was no follow-up conversation.
Right.
She essentially dropped that bombshell on you. So I want to go back because there was so much that you were throwing out there that I want to kind of unpack real quick.
Sure.
You said that you're just now beginning to communicate the term and identify with the term adoptee.
Yeah.
Why is that?
So the way I was raised is kind of like even though we didn't talk about it, so I'll fast forward a little bit. So my adoptive mother dies when I'm 16, and then my adoptive father gives up his parental rights, and I have to go live with my adoptive grandmother in another state when I'm 17, my senior year of high school. So the whole time, now my grandmother is pretty open. She's like, oh, adoption is no big deal, blah, 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 blah. But she brings it up every now and then. But it's kind of like, you don't walk around saying like, this is my adoptive cousin and this is my,
Right.
it's just your mom, your dad. I'm just saying it for these purposes, right? So we know who's who. But I wasn't raised thinking about it. Like, it's not something that bothered me daily, consciously. So yeah, I had no reason to be thinking like, oh, these are my adoptive parents and I'm an adoptee and yeah, so forth. Yeah.
And so the fact that when you were 10 and
hmm
were told that you were adopted, from the time your adopted family took you in and this point where you're actually hearing that you were adopted in your interactions with your grandparents, etc., no one caused you to feel that you weren't a part of that family
Oh, no, no,
biologically.
no. So nobody made me feel like that, but I've done quite a bit of introspection and I always didn't feel like I belonged though.
Hmm.
So
No,
yeah.
finish your thought, because I'm about to say something. No, but please finish your thought.
So, I mean, there was this idea, especially a little bit before I found out I was adopted. I still kind of felt that way, but I didn't know what to call it. After I found out, and then as I got older, I always felt like I just didn't belong. Like I didn't look like anybody. My grandmother has this story where it's kind of like she's telling me that I did look like my adoptive mother, her daughter, that no one could tell the difference between our pictures. That and I know she's doing this to not only make me feel comfortable, but I think to make herself feel comfortable because Black people do adopt, but in the 70s it wasn't like this. It was not common for someone
Yeah.
to adopt a baby out of the family that they just
Hmm.
didn't know. Yeah. Okay. So that's why I didn't, yeah, I never felt like I belonged.
That's so interesting that you say that because I immediately resonate with what you're saying.
Yeah.
So for myself, um, my mom has four children, my older brother, me,
hmm
and then there are two sisters after myself. And I remember growing up, I never felt like I belonged. I was extremely quiet and introverted, extremely shy. And I noticed that the man who I called dad treated me differently
Yeah.
than my three siblings. Not to mention the obvious, I'm darker than everybody else in the house.
Yeah.
Right. And so, there were situations growing up where physically
Yeah.
he was abusive towards me. And I'm figuring, why aren't they experiencing this same thing? So at
Yeah.
8 years old, I remember my mom sat me down one day and she said, baby, I want to talk to you. And she has a picture, that she's holding. And there's this guy in the frame. And she says, do you know who this is? Nah, you, I
How
don't
would
know
I
who this, how would I know?
know?
And she said, this is your father. Again, an 8-year-old kid trying to process
Yeah.
what I'm being told. And the first question I asked, so am I adopted?
Right.
Right now, I was born in 78. This was probably 86,
Yeah.
87, maybe somewhere up in there. Because for me, I'm like, okay, well, that would explain why I'm darker than everyone else. That
Right.
would explain why I'm being treated differently.
Yeah.
And so she shared the story with me. No, you're not adopted. Now, my mom, she is my biological mom, but
Right.
spoiler alert, the man who I called dad wasn't my dad.
Right. Right.
Right.
Right.
And so my mom shared the story with me, but I remember I did not feel
Yeah.
like I belonged, but I didn't know why I
Because you
felt that way.
sense it. You sense it. So the other thing I've learned too is there's something called genetic mirroring,
Hmm.
where yeah, it's something that adoptees don't experience. So and so you have your birth mother who you've grown up with. Well,
Yep.
adoptees, it's a common thing to it's something that people who grow up with their birth family is used to. You know that you got your daddy's eyes or your mama's whatever, or even personality and traits and how you move and your voice. It's called genetic mirroring. So
Hmm.
adoptees who are adopted out of their families, they don't have that. And it can make you feel a way, even though you don't know as a child why you feel a way. Yeah, it's because you're not even looking at yourself to like mirror back who you are. Yeah.
That makes a whole lot of sense. And one of the things that I think what I appreciated most, not only my mom sharing with me about my father, but I asked her why she
Hmm.
chose to share with me in that moment. And she told me it seemed as though you were searching for something,
Yep.
that you were, and she said you were looking for something, you didn't know what you were looking for, you didn't
Yeah.
know how to put your finger on it. And I just believed that you needed to know where you
That's
came from.
good.
That was so helpful for me.
That is good. Your mom was intuitive, and that's important.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. If
Can
you're
you
just tuning
imagine?
in,
No, I
no,
was gonna
no.
say, can you imagine being 28 and finding that out or something?
And that's where we're about to go because were you 28 when you first found out?
No, I was 10 years old when I found out that I was adopted, but then I went looking.
Then you went looking. All right. So if you just tuned in, this is a Tribe Called Family. I am your host, Octavius Davis. The guest today is Dr. Katherin Garland, educator, philanthropist, author, and newly embraced term adoptee. Uh, Now, I want to go back to the adoptee part very quickly before we speak about your journey
Okay.
of pursuing your biological family. There was a phrase that you used that I had never heard before, and I might mix it up a little bit, but
Hmm.
so I'm going to have to paraphrase. You said I'm an adoptee of a same ethnic group,
Oh, it's called same race adoptee.
same race adoptee. Uh,
Yeah.
Talk to us very quickly about same race adoptee. What does that mean, and why is it important for you?
Yeah. So I think we're all maybe familiar with when we hear about adoption. Again, I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And so adoption is like the TV version, like Different Strokes, Webster.
Yeah.
So those are called transracial adoptees, and I think it's something that it's become like mainstream. So like the oh my God, what's the like Brad Pitt and what's her
Mhm.
name?
Angelina
Right,
Jolie.
right. Adopting, children of different races, different ethnicities is a thing that we see that white people tend to do. Um, Same race adoptee is literally like my parents were black, so I didn't feel different in that way. I was raised blackity black black. My grandmother, my grandmother was like in the civil rights movement. Yeah, so I came, and which makes a difference because
Sure.
transracial adoptees have, in addition to the 7 core issues of adoption, they have like a whole nother set because they didn't see anybody who looked like them.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
really not look like them. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you found out at 10 that you were adopted.
Yeah.
And I'd have to imagine there were a litany of questions that began bombarding your mind
Yeah.
at that time. Something that I find very interesting about your educational practice, and you can articulate it far better than I ever will. But there's a phrase that I've been using, and I watched an interview that you did recently, last November, about your educational practice. I was like, that's what I do with my question. And so basically, the saying that I often repeat is questions are the answers to our problems.
Mm.
And so here you are, 10 years old, all these different questions running through your mind. They eventually motivate you to do something, right? And
Yeah.
so you're the educator. You know what that questions are the answers to the problem. What is that educationally, pontificationally speaking? What is that process?
So, I mean, really at 10, I had a bunch of questions and I had a bunch of feelings. I literally instantly felt like I was around strangers,
Mm.
and liars, which sometimes we
Wow.
don't want to say, but that's what that is. If you pretend like a child is yours who's not yours biologically, you
Yeah.
are lying. But at the time, I didn't know. I had all these questions, and then I just kind of tucked them away and went on about my little traumatic life because it actually like spirals into these other things that we really don't talk about, I think, enough with adoptees. So I do all the things, go to college, get married, have my first baby. And that's when I'm like, oh, what happened here?
Mm.
Because as a mother, watching and experiencing a baby grow, right? And then having a child, I was like, well, how something must be really bad for a mother
Mm.
to have given me away, my mother to have given me away. How could you do that? So I start the process of trying to find out who my birth family is. And I was born and raised in Chicago. So I go through DCFS and they give me a big, hard time about it. They say they are not in the business of reconnecting families, they are in the business of sending children to loving homes. And I kept pressing the lady, pressing the lady. So she sent me to something called the Midwest Adoption Agency, where they kind of do the work for you. I want to say it's like a public service because I didn't have to pay anything.
Okay.
So they asked me for my birth name, birth date, and I think that was it. So I had to call my dad, my adoptive father, because I was like, birth name.
Right. Right.
And that's something that a lot of people don't know too, is that no matter what age you adopt a child, you can change their name,
Yep.
which is linked to a person's identity, right? So I found out my birth name. My birth name was Petulia Belcher, kind of like the lady Petula Clark, but it had an I in it. And so they had that information. They had my birthday. She found my original birth certificate, which is another big, huge deal. Adoptees are not don't have the right to get their original birth certificate, even though it's our birth certificate. But
Sure.
anyway, so the agency found that, found my birth mother. So that's my maternal side.
Mhm.
Um, Sent me a 5-page packet of information from the time that, so that's the reason I know that I was left in an apartment building. It's all in this report because
Wow.
when the government is involved, they have to have like a report. So I have the report. It tells me about that. It tells me about my birth mother was actually schizophrenic. So she lived with mental illness. Um, and she would like travel back and forth trying to figure out if she wanted to raise me, like have this baby and raise me, have an abortion, because it was fairly new. It was May 73. Roe v. Wade was March 73. So she was having like these, like this whole like the whole report shows me the angst, right?
Yeah.
Um, but what ended up happening is she was already married to somebody else,
Mm.
and she was leaving this guy. And I also have an older sister, so it was her and my older sister, and she was trying to leave her husband, who I found out later, and I'll get to that, but I find out that he's not my father. So in order for her to legally at that time give me up for adoption, relinquish me, she had to have his signature, and
Right.
she wasn't going to do that, so she left me in this apartment building instead. um yeah.
Let- So here it is. You have this report, and you're
Hmm.
essentially living vicariously through your biological mother's words.
Right.
You shared what your emotional state was reading that book as a 10-year-old and
Hmm.
wondering how could someone give their kid up to
Hmm.
strangers. Fast forward now as an adult, you're reading your mother's, I'll use your word, angst.
Hmm.
You're reading her angst. What was your thoughts? What were your emotions as you're just kind of essentially putting yourself in her shoes in that moment on paper?
Octavius, I cannot impress upon you. I was raised in the time where we don't deal with things. So I put that thing literally in a box and put it
Mm,
under my bed. And I was like, oh, okay. Oh well, that was a sad story. I don't need to deal with that at
mm,
all. So I was in my 30s when I did that.
okay.
And then I just kept living like, okay. But so actually, oh, I'm skipping a part. My mother died when I was about 5. All of this is in the report. She drowned in Lake Michigan.
Mm,
And I'll just throw this out. It's kind of, I don't know, confusing what happened because according to her sister, she was an avid swimmer. So who knows what happened with that. But
sure.
so I never got the opportunity to meet her. So there's like that part of the story, right? I should have grieved that part, but I didn't. I was able to meet her sister, who ironically is named Katherin. Um, and then about 2 years later, she actually died of a heart attack. So yeah,
Your aunt, your
my
biological aunt.
biological aunt,
Mm,
yeah, who and we had like a really amazing relationship just for those 2 years. She told me the story from her side, like how she tried to adopt me, but the whole family has a history of mental illness and being a part of the system. So the social worker was like, leave this little girl alone.
mm,
We're gonna pluck her out and put her somewhere else. So she tells me all of this. Then she dies of a heart attack. And I'm really like, oh, yeah, I'm not dealing with it. So I keep going, keep going, keep
so
going.
you put that in the box as well.
Yeah,
Okay.
all of it is just a big box. The
All
box
right.
is getting bigger. So um, I end up, and I don't want to like spoil anything, but I
Sure.
end up with, I have all these unresolved traumatic experiences, right? And they're just piling up in addition to the adoption stuff. So I end up having an experience, which I will just call a rock bottom moment, where I had to stop what I was doing, how I was living life, and figure out what in the world is going on. So I do all this work. I realize that, there's abandonment issues, there's issues with adoption, there's issues with, I'll say with, I have like molestation in my background. Um, and so all of these things have piled up. I get to be 42 years old. That's when I start like healing and figuring
Mm,
out all the things, right? Um, so I think I'm done. And I had no intention on seeking any more family because I'm like, if this is what it's going to be,
right. Yeah. My box can't get more bigger.
right,
My box is full.
it's too much. So I'm minding my own happy business. And I decided to do Ancestry because I want to find out where I should go in Africa. Because, am I really African or whatever?
Sure.
And Ancestry is, super disrespectful. I get on there and they tell me all the things, whatever, Cameroon, blah, 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 da, da, da. You click on the other tab and it also says, so and so is your father. And I was like, right, that's how you looking. That's how I was looking. Yeah, I was like, what is this? This can't be.
So okay, so ancestry spilling the tea, right?
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
let's rewind for a moment. So as you're reading this file, you shared a moment ago how the dilemma that your mom was in when she was
Hmm.
carrying you because she was married to a gentleman she had intended on leaving, but he
Hmm.
wasn't your father.
Right.
Now, but now here it is, ancestry is saying, okay, this is your father. So bridge that gap for us. Were you initially under the impression that the man your mother was married to, that your biological mother was married to, was your father prior to seeing what ancestry was saying?
No, I knew that her husband at the time was not my father.
Okay,
And I had met that sister. I met my sister, that's her father. And she told me all about him and whatever. So I knew it wasn't him. Also in the report, they asked her who the father was. She said it was the janitor of the building that she was living in. So I always thought it was the janitor. Also, Aunt Catherine had told me, and I didn't tell her anything that was in the story, but part of it she told me is that she had asked her sister, well, if you're gonna have a baby, like at least tell me who the daddy is. And she said she pointed to a guy in the building, and it was a tall, white, lanky man who looked like the janitor. So she thought that it was this person, and she also thought I was going to be tall and lighter and lanky because she
Sure.
thought it was my father. Mm-mm. Nope, none of
So,
those.
so what did ancestry say, girl? Talk to us. What did ancestry say?
So ancestry, again, literally it says, and I wrote about this, so I'll use the pseudonym. I won't tell my birth father, but I
Sure.
named him Philip. So it basically says like Philip Smith is your father, and I was just like, this is craziness. So I don't know if you've ever been on Ancestry, but you can, message the people within the thing. It's kind
Sure.
of like a Facebook. You can DM people, and only you can see it. And so I did that. I emailed him, told him who I was, told him what Ancestry said. He doesn't respond. So then I also DM like a sister who was on there. She doesn't respond. So I'm like,
Mm.
okay, I don't know what to do. A couple months later, another sister gets on. And at the time I don't know these are my sisters because it says something like, I think it says something like a cousin or something like that. Like it could be a cousin. It doesn't
Sure.
say sister. So I'm like, well, maybe. So then I'm trying to reconfigure this story. Maybe these are
Right.
my cousins. This is my uncle. Certainly, this man is not my father. Anyway, the second sister gets on and she responds to me. And I now know that she's like the connector. She's the one. There's always a person who's interested in family
Yeah.
trees, and that's
Yeah.
that person. So she's responding to me and trying to get all the information. And in the background, I find out they're all Googling me actually to find
Mm.
out like who is
Who
this
are you?
lady and what does she want?
Right.
Okay. So then that sister tells our father, and he gets on and it's like, oh my god, I didn't know, I don't know how to work technology, I didn't see it. And I was like, okay, boy. So but he's like super excited, like, I didn't know you even existed, blah 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 blah. For a very long time he didn't know. I was like, well, do you remember my mother? He's like, I don't remember. So then let's fast forward a few months. I happen, we're passing pictures back and forth. I sent him a picture of my daughter, and he's like, my youngest daughter, and he's like, oh, he said she's beautiful. She looks just like your mother. I was like, oh,
Mm.
you do
You do
remember.
remember. Right.
Yeah. So he does remember, and he filled in the blanks and was like, so here's what happened. He said she was coming to look for an apartment because she was fleeing her husband.
So he was indeed there in that building.
Oh, yeah. He lived in that building. She was looking for an apartment, but the super wasn't there. And so she was like, can I see your apartment? And he was like, yeah, you can see my apartment. And that was the end of it.
Mm.
That's the end of the story.
Wow. So to get that information,
Mhm,
and if I'm remembering the timeline properly, at
mhm,
42 you had done this work, and he's like, all right,
mhm.
I'm good. I done emptied out the box
I
of
emptied
celluloid.
the box, right?
Right? Put the box away. I'm good now. And so here it is. Your biological father is putting this in your lap. What do you do with that?
Man, Octavius, it was a lot. I thought I was okay because I had all these tools and whatever, but I end up kind of like relapsing into all types of behaviors. Like I used to drink a lot, and I ended up just going back to doing those coping mechanisms because I actually could not. I wasn't dealing well. And what I found out is that my sister and I have a sister who is the same age as I am, from my father. So we are 2 months apart.
Mm.
And so it was a lot. It was a lot for my father. It was a lot for his wife, who he's still married to,
Mm.
who has been married. I'm 51. They've been married 50 years. So all of it has been a lot.
Yeah.
And at the time, even though I thought I was okay, I really was not okay. It just kind of like reopened some abandonment wounds. And I forgot there's a name for it that they say specifically with adoptees who reconnect with their families. Like sometimes you can have like a re-abandonment
Mm.
because it's not always now we live happily ever after. It's
Right.
not like that. And especially because I think birth families don't always have the tools either, right? Like they weren't expecting me they the same way I'm reading this information, they're like, what? So
Right.
they don't have the tools. I didn't have the tools. It was hard. It was very, very hard.
At the onset, before we began recording today's show, I shared with you that I've spoken with so many adults,
Yeah.
individuals that are very close to me, individuals that I've known for years, who find themselves in a situation where the person or the individuals that they were told is their father or their mother, they're now learning that that's not the case.
Yeah.
And in some of those instances, no, in most of those instances, the parent who does know all the information is reluctant to
Yeah.
even share it. And so your story is one that's unique but common, if I
Yeah.
can position it that way.
Yeah.
And I believe common in a very detrimental way to so many of us who are seeking to, I forget the phrase that you used earlier, but to mirror
Yeah.
that relatability, that connection with our true family members. So here you are today with everything that you've learned, everything that you've experienced. You know, 1 + 1 is 2 over here, 4 + 4 is 8 over there.
Yeah.
With all that you've gathered, Dr. Garland, how are you sitting now with this information? And I guess the better question is, where's your box? What did you do? Where is this box right now? What is the current state of this box?
So the box is gone
Okay.
because that is one thing that I had to learn. You can't put it in the box because just because it's in the box doesn't mean that it's not there affecting you. Um, I've also had to figure out like what's mine to carry and what's
Hmm,
not.
that's
So for
good.
example, like you said, a lot of the elders, I have a book in my mind and I want to get a t-shirt that says the elders be tripping because they do. And and
Yep.
it's like sometimes they just are. But to your point earlier, my father to this day says he does not know that I was born. And
Mhm.
it has caused havoc between him and his wife. And he can't understand why she's mad because it was a long, because even if it did happen, and not even if it did, here I am.
Yep.
And Octavius, I look just like the man. That's the other thing that's a
What?
problem. Right. I look just like this guy.
Wow.
So um it's causing a problem in his relationship, right? Years, decades later,
Yeah.
because he won't just say, here's what happened to her.
Yeah.
But that's what I've had to learn is that is his shame to carry, not mine. I don't have anything to do with that. I'm
Yeah.
just the result. I've also learned to I understand that just like biological families, you're not gonna get along with everybody. So I have three sisters. The one I get along with the most is my absolute best friend, is
Mm.
the one that I'm 2 months apart from.
Is
Literally
that the
just
connector? Is that the one that connects?
no, that's not the one. Yeah, that's
Okay.
not the one that connects is like can't deal with it. Can't deal. Yeah.
Sure.
And she's a lot younger and she has a certain perception of her father. And that's hard. Like you need work to do that. And then I have my mother's daughter, who is my other sister. We don't communicate hardly at all. And because she has her own set of issues with our mother and her background, because her actions impacted her too.
Yeah.
Um, so that's what I've really learned is like you can't suppress it, and I hate to be all cliche, but I think it's something like you can't heal what you don't face or something like that. But it's true.
Sure.
Yeah, you have to face reality. Whether it's not going to be what you, if you're an adoptee, then 9 times out of 10, the reality is not going to be what you thought it was going to be. And it's not going to be like I thought I had this whole story that my parents were teenage parents and
Mhm.
they couldn't take care of me and now I'm gonna find them and we're gonna all reconnect. No, that's not how. Yeah,
Yeah.
rarely is that the case.
One of the things about this podcast is a tribe called family. Family comes in all shapes, forms, and sizes. And sometimes family comes about when, there wasn't a plan
Right.
to bring about a family. So much that I would love to dive into with you, Dr. Garland, but time is against us. But I will end on this note because throughout today you've been sharing your story with us, and there are a lot of details that we didn't even
Yeah.
graze the surface of. So you have a book, In Search of a Salve, Memoir of a Sex Addict.
Yeah.
Share with our listeners just very quickly what inspired this book and what can they expect once they pick up their copy.
Yeah, so a lot of people, they think the title is super salacious and don't think of it that way. Also, it's not a book about, all my sexual exploits, even though some of that is in there. But it's really a book about how unresolved trauma led to
Yeah.
what's called a behavioral addiction. And the behavioral addiction for me was sex, but it can be anything. It can be eating, it can be gambling, it can be porn, it can be internet addiction. Love addiction is one. So that's what the book is about, but it also outlines family history and specifically how, like what we've been talking about, how Black families, and I'll just say Black because I'm Black. I'm
Yep.
sure all families maybe do this, but I just know how Black families tend to relate or not relate to one another. So, and then how that affects you growing up.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've only made it to chapter 3 so far, but from I believe chapter 1 was Trina.
Yeah.
I immediately connected. And I won't tell the details of the book. You have to go and buy the book, okay? If you want to know who Trina is, go and get the book. Not the rap artist Trina that's inside the book. But I'll say the phrase, "Let's play mommy and daddy," and instantly my mind went back to my childhood when I was in kindergarten, placed in the care of a young lady who may have been third or fourth grade.
Mm.
My mom she wasn't gone very long.
Yeah, because it doesn't take long.
Doesn't take long. She said, "Let's play mommy and daddy."
Yep.
And despite the fact that I was in kindergarten, despite the fact that she was third or fourth grade, it was a sexual molestation that I'd experienced.
Right.
And it wasn't the first one. There was another that occurred with another young lady who said the same phrase.
Yeah.
And her mom was in the other room. And as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old boy, I didn't understand what was going on and what was
Right.
happening. But the door that opened up in my life
Yep.
and the work that I'm still doing today as a 45-year-old man because
Yeah.
of that phrase, "Let's play mommy and daddy,"
Yeah.
get the book. Get the book.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dr. Garland.
No, I was gonna
closing thoughts or
say
remarks? Yes.
thank you for sharing that, especially as a man and especially as a Black man, because a lot of times we don't like to see men as being victims of sexual abuse. But that's exactly what that is. And we a lot of times don't like to admit that something like that it impacts your entire life.
Yep. And kind of like your box, I have a box too. I've had a box, right? I'm learning to clean out my box.
Right.
But I never realized until maybe 5 years ago how all those things I shared about my stepfather and the abuse I experienced with him, just shared with the instances as a young kid, all of that stuff nearly wrecked my marriage
Yep.
because all this stuff started coming up and I had no clue what was going on. And my wife was like, "Look, you need to get your stuff
You need
together."
help, right?
Right. But I had always been that way. So I didn't,
Yep.
or rather, that's all I knew. That's the only
Right.
way that I knew.
Right.
The coping, that was the only way that I knew how
Yep.
to cope. until I was introduced through a different way, through therapy and getting
Right.
additional tools and being able to have to say, okay, it's time to pull out this box that's been sitting under
Right.
your all these years and look at all that stuff that I tucked away
Yeah.
that had begun, that I began realizing was the root of the challenges I
Everything.
was experiencing.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dr. Garland, thank you so much for hanging out with us today here on A Tribe Called Family. Once again, In Search of a Salve, Memoir of a Sex Addict is Dr. Garland's book. Where can our listeners and viewers go to get your book?
You can go wherever books are sold, and I do like to tell people I actually read the audiobook myself, so you can get that on Audible. People say that they love it because it's like I'm reading them a little story. So if you like audiobooks, you can do that. Kindle and the hardcover, as Octavius has. Barnes and Noble, you can order it and go pick it up from there. So anywhere you enjoy books. I do think though, if you can support indie bookstores, then do that, and you can get them from bookshop.org and have it delivered to your favorite independent bookstore.
Thank you, Dr. Garland. And thank you as well for hanging out with us today on A Tribe Called Family. We'll catch you next time.